Okay, in this video, what we are going to do is kind of like we're going to be going backwards from what we have been doing. In previous sections, we would be given a function, such as the one that you see here, x squared plus 8x plus 15 equals 0, and asked to find its zeros. One of the ways that we did this was by putting the polynomial in its factored form. So we are going to factor this first. In order to multiply to get x squared, I'll need x times x. And then the last terms in the parentheses have to do two things. They have to multiply to 15 and at the same time add to positive 8. So in order to do that, I will need a positive 5 and a positive 3. Then once I got my factors, I would set each of those equal to 0 and solve them for x. So here on the first one, I would subtract the 5 from both sides. That would give me x equals negative 5. And here I would subtract the 3 from both sides to get x equals negative 3. So the two solutions, or the two zeros of this equation, were negative 5 and negative 3. Now, what we're going to continue with in this section is, if I am given the zeros, how do I come and turn them back into the polynomial function or the equation that they came from? Well, we're going to do it two ways. We're going to do it one way. We're going to start off by taking this negative 5 back to the factor that it came from. So negative 5's factor was x plus 5. Negative 3's factor was x plus 3. So once we get the factors, then we will multiply the factors together. So if I FOIL this first, x times x would give me x squared. My outer, x times 3, gives me 3x. My inner, 5 times x, gives me 5x. And then my last, 5 times 3, gives me 15. These middle terms are like terms that you can put together. So now you have x squared plus 8x plus 15, which is what you started with. So that's what we're going to be doing in this section. We are going to be given the zeros of a function and then asked to find what was the function that they came from. All right, so let's look at these numbers. So these are going to be the zeros that I have been given. So I'm going to go backwards and try to find the polynomial function that they came from. So I'm going to, each one of these came from a factor. So if negative 2 is the 0, then x plus 2 is the factor. So there's that one. If 3 is a 0, it came from x minus 3. And the last one, if negative 6 is the 0, it came from x plus 6. There's the factorization, and now I'm going to multiply the three factors together. So I'll start off with the first two parentheses. X times x gives me x squared. Outside, x times negative 3 gives me negative 3x. My inside, positive 2 times x gives me positive 2x. And then my last, positive 2 times negative 3 gives me negative 6. The middle terms are like terms. So now I have x squared, negative 3x, and plus 2x. When I put those together, I get minus x, and then bring down the minus 6. So that multiplied the first two parentheses together. Now I'll bring down that last one, which is x plus 6, and multiply that. So the first thing that I'm going to multiply or distribute is this x squared to both of those. So x squared times x gives me x to the third. And then I've got x squared times positive 6, which gives me positive 6x squared. Then I'll move and I'll distribute this negative x to both of those. So I have negative x times positive x, which gives me negative x squared, and negative x times positive 6, which gives me negative 6. And then the last distributing, this negative 6 to both of those. So I have negative 6 times x. Oops, I forgot my negative. That should be an x. Sorry, I forgot to write that. So, sorry, lost my train of thought. So now I'm moving and distributing this negative 6 to both terms in the other parentheses. So negative 6 times x gives me a negative 6x. And the last one, negative 6 times positive 6, gives me negative 36. And then you'll clean it up by combining your like terms. So you're going to want to put the squareds together and then also put your x's together. So I've got x to the third. 6x squared minus 1x squared gives me positive 5x squared. Negative 6x and another negative 6x gives me negative 12x. And then the last, minus 36. All right, next problem. If 2, 8i, and negative 8i are my zeros, and we want to find what function they came from, we're going to do just like the last one. We're going to turn our zeros into factors. So if 2 is the 0, it came from x minus 2. If 8i is your 0, it came from x minus 8i. And if negative 8i is your 0, it came from x plus 8i. Now, before I start multiplying all those together, if you have what's called conjugate pairs, you want to multiply those together first. Conjugate pairs are like these two here. They're exactly the same except for their signs in the middle, because they're going to clean each other up when you FOIL those together. Okay? Also, I want to talk about what I is. So I is going to be equal to the square root of negative 1. During the process of multiplying these two conjugate pairs together, I'm actually going to run into an I squared. So let's see what happens if you squared both of these sides. The left side would turn to I squared. On the right side, the squared actually cancels out that square root, and I am just left with negative 1. So we are going to run into that during this process. So here, when I FOIL my first x times x, gives me x squared. My outer x times positive 8i gives me positive 8xi. My inner gives me a negative 8xi. And then my last, I've got negative 8i times positive 8i, which gives me negative 64i squared. So here is why you want to multiply conjugate pairs together first. The middle two terms will always cancel each other out because they're the positive and the negative of the same thing. So I am left with the x squared here. Now, remember what I squared is equal to. It's equal to -1. So this actually says -64 times -1, which turns it into +64. So when you multiplied x minus 8i times x plus 8i, it left you with x squared plus 64. Now I'll just bring down my other factor and FOIL here. So my first, x times x squared, gives me x to the third. My outer is x times 64, so that gives me 64x. My inner gives me a -2x squared, and my last, -2 times +64, gives me -128. Now, this problem doesn't actually have any like terms because nobody has the same exponent, but you do need to write your terms with the exponents in descending order. So I start with my highest exponent, which is x to the third, but then I need to move to the squared. So then I have -2x squared, then the +64x, and then the -128.